And because I came from the tourism conference, I've also got some fun handouts too. So Eli Harrington for the record.
Samples?
Not today. So I'll pass a few of these out in either direction. You guys can get a sense of what we actually do. And I'll kind of get into, I did this in PowerPoint sort of pitch deck form. So what I thought I'd do is I've got about 12 to 15 minutes on here, links and all this fun stuff. Happy to take questions during or at the end. But what I wanted to start with, I grew up in Winooski. My background's in social entrepreneurship. I worked for the Lake Champlain Regional Chamber of Commerce for a few years, working with Vermont Council on World Affairs, doing international exchange programs, professional matchmaking. I say that because we have a lot of international visitors in this building, and they are phenomenal programs. So if you ever have a chance to do any of this work. My cannabis experience started with this guy pictured here, Mark Tucci. I was 12 years old tying his shoes in my mom's house so he could come down here and testify with then Representative Zuckerman. Back in 2002, 2003, things were very, very, very different. But my uncle was dying of lung cancer. Mark went to high school with my mom at Burton, and he became friends with my uncle. And so through that process of watching my uncle dying of chemo, getting relief, watching Mark battling MS, getting relief, and then seeing him become involved in the political process. So I always have to mention Tooch. Vermont Cannabis Collaborative really jump-started a lot of things for people. I think seeing that the business leaders in Chittenden County in particular were taking an interest in this was a big catalyst. And I was lucky to participate in that as a volunteer note taker. And through that process realized that I had a lot of questions about what was happening with cannabis news and information. People like myself in their late 20s, early 30s, wanted to know what are the laws, what's going on in other states, how do I get involved? So my business partner and I, Monica Donovan, started Heady Vermont in 2016 in March. So I'm not going to run you through the entire media kit. I'll save that for the ad buying people on the sides of the room here. But just for you to look through, as an independent media, company, we've started digitally. This is our first foray into print, which I'm very excited about. But there's a ton of interest. We serve really a domestic Vermont audience, and the demographics. If you look at it, I'm not going to complain about any advertising restrictions. Our demo are people well educated over the age of 30 for the most part. And I think when we're talking about cannabis, that's really the demographic that we're talking to and talking about in this next phase of the legal regulated paradigm. The fastest growing demographic of consumers are baby boomers. It's my mom with knee replacements, who is using salves to sleep through the night. And again, this is kind of reflective. I'll skip the stats, but I am going to talk about events because we are a media and events company. The Vermont Hemp Fest is in September in Burke. That was kind of the first big scale event that we do. And I really hope that, for people in this room and everywhere in this building, will come to this Vermont Cannabis and Hemp Convention. This is something I started going to 5 years ago in Boston. Just came back 2 weeks ago. They had 350 businesses paying over $2,000 each for booths. They had 15,000 people attending. And this is at the Heinz Convention Center on Boylston Street in downtown Boston. So this is really a well-developed, seeing this develop in real time in the region, and having been a part of this myself and paying attention to it, there's a lot that I think we've picked up, and I think a lot that we can learn and share from other states. I mentioned these events as well because we have done, this picture on the Cannabis Guide, July 1st, we did a legalization celebration. Now we did this in Johnson, Vermont instead of Essex, based on city attorney's definition of a public place. And I'll be happy to talk about events later. But short answer is that, knock on wood, we have had 0 incidences at any of our events. And that includes our Growers Cup in January, where we had over 500 people consuming legally on private property over the age of 21. No arrests, no DUIs, no UIs, no noise complaints, none of this. So I would be happy to, Sheriff Marcoux and I, the July event worked well because I spent about 80 hours with Sheriff Marcoux, State Police, EMS, and went through the select board and got conditional approval for a noise permit based on our safety plan. So I mention this because events are something that we can do in the short term. And I think through our liquor control model, there's a very clear precedent for ways that you can start creating some decentralized economic activity and also solve the question of where can people legally consume this product that is now legal to consume. So just getting into a little bit of the kind of challenges, like I said, the medical program is in a tough place, and I think this is for a multitude of reasons. Everybody in here is older than me, although with more hair. 2003, 2004 was a very different time. Vermont's medical program getting online required a lot of sacrifices and compromises. Governor Dean was very much opposed at the time. So the medical program started out in a very different context. And because of that formation and paradigm, we are now in the position that we're in. Department of Public Safety are the ones who oversee our medical marijuana program. I liken this to the Lactose Intolerance Society overseeing our dairy program. When we're here talking about the Commissioner of Health, the Department of Health not wanting to go and inspect kitchens that produce food for the most vulnerable, sickest population, it makes you wonder how much regulation and oversight the law enforcement people are doing when it comes to medical marijuana, especially when we see $300,000 being transferred out of the medical marijuana budget to the general fund. So, there has been a lack of, because of all this, we have a lack of regulatory infrastructure and really engagement. Licensing, oversight, education, and engagement. I say the education part, there are ads, on Facebook. The state has spent money on drug driving campaigns, on not using campaigns. The consumer education's really been up to the dispensaries. They've had to do all this because the Department of Health assets were so bad that dispensaries had to develop themselves to actually give patients information. So the resistance on the state's part, and again, being under our public safety, it's not a surprise, to engage and really think about cannabis has really stunted us. So we are not like Oregon, we're not like Colorado, we're not like Massachusetts, we're not like California, we're not like places that have had an established, smooth, open, competitive medical program. We're not. And one of our challenges is how to best integrate the existing medical marijuana dispensaries. They have competencies which they have developed that are undeniable and that are going to be huge assets in this. Cultivation on the commercial scale, testing, delivery, retail as well. These are things that they have all worked hard to do to a very unnecessarily onerous standpoint. And so I think that there's a place for dispensaries, there's a role for them to play. We can't ignore that these are the same plants. And they have a responsibility to fulfill the medical program. But the question of how they participate in the adult use, I'm not going to call it recreational, in the adult use paradigm, I think is one we need to think about carefully. Because I do not at all support this idea of temporary licenses unless there are some very, very clear conditions. And those conditions need to be small cultivators not only applying, but being licensed, being approved. A lot of the conversation around temporary licenses that, in 12 to 18 months, everybody else will be licensed. That's a total fallacy. In Massachusetts, it took 2 years with 10 people working full-time and millions of dollars pushing them to get this done quickly. So we as a state, and again, there is no application that exists that somebody like Nick can go download for a medical marijuana cultivator. There is no application that exists. There's no oversight. We don't even know how many people are on the commission. So we need to, if we're building the house and using this analogy, start with our foundation. And that foundation is supply, regulatory infrastructure, and testing. In any one of these, probably regulatory infrastructure, testing, and supply, if we're going to do it in the right chronological order. And that bottom point, short-term revenue versus sustainable industry. There is an opportunity for short-term revenue. The idea of $75,000 for an exclusive right to run this industry is crazy low. as an entrepreneur, there are people who would love to pay $750,000 for the right to enter this. And let's see if that reloads. I have the Mass Cannabis Control Commission. This is the sales information in Massachusetts. Okay, this is in 18 weeks. So I'll zoom in here so you can see $64.5 million in retail sales have been done in Massachusetts. Okay, so the question of selling exclusive access to a market this is a 9-figure question. And so it's worth taking time to make this a sustainable industry, not to chase short-sighted revenue, because we will set into place structures that will be hard to undo. And as much as I personally like a lot of the people, the dispensary people who are involved, this notion that it's going to be easier for other people to become participants in this industry once there's $65 million or $100 million market sale is disingenuous, and I think not something that's realistic. So I say that again, not because there are nefarious forces at play, but because there are realities, and it's worth setting people up on an equal playing field. There are places where dispensaries should be advantaged and can support this. Large cultivation, we're going to need a lot of this. Delivery, they've got this statewide system down with too much security, but still. And maybe some retail. But again, that's really challenging as well. I have to just really quickly talk about public safety and prevention. When we're talking about alcohol and comparing alcohol and cannabis, it's really apples to oranges. And looking at this research, I say this as somebody who worked for the Mass Department of Transportation doing public safety campaigns to get young people not to drive under the influence. So I'm super familiar with these stats, and this is in here. I'll just pull up this one chart, which is something that's not a crazy idea, that the amount of alcohol that we allow the amount of impairment that we legally tolerate is going to mess you up about 7 to 10 times more than you would be at a 0.0. At a 0.08, you're 7 to 10 times more likely to get in an accident. At the comparable level of cannabis intoxication, you're 2 to 3 times more. So we legally tolerate a very high amount of risk. There are a lot of campaigns to reduce BAC level to 0.05 because of this research. And again, this is a NHTSA here. So I don't think, research is great, but common sense I think is even better. Cannabis is not new in Vermont, second highest consumption rate in the country before legalization. Our roads have not gotten any worse in the last year than they were 3 years ago. And we have twice as many suicide deaths in this state as we do from all our road fatalities. So if we're talking about public health and what are public health concerns, the 10 to 15 people who die in cannabis-related traffic fatalities are all tragic, but it's about the same as dying motorcycle-related fatalities on the roads. So consumption's not increasing dramatically. Our roads are not getting any better. So it's important to put things in perspective, because I think a lot of the public safety concerns are overstated. And then I had this Colorado Department of Transportation. When we're talking about messaging, talking about prevention, Colorado has done an excellent job, I think, in this way, as far as their different campaigns that they've run, looking at some actual research, drug driving, and we have campaign materials we can download. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. As somebody who owns a media outlet that speaks to the cannabis community, I'm very interested in this. I'm interested in working with the state, working with prevention folks, and talking about what's some good messaging that we can create that's better than Leo the Lion on a Dare t-shirt that's going to actually impact people's behavior. So messaging works. It's something that we can fund right now. And I'm not sure how much was in, I haven't gone through this year's budget. I'm not sure how much money the governor requested to be dedicated towards drug driving prevention messaging, but that's something that can happen right now. Not to $6 to $8 million worth probably, but that's something we can do. So opportunities with this bill, building the regulatory capacity with licensing and oversight. You know, the idea of, I'm not sure exactly how boards and commissions work. I know in Massachusetts, it's a full-time job and there are about a dozen other people who work with the commissioners. The idea of 3 people with an executive director and an admin reviewing 50 applications that are each 50 pages long in any kind of time frame to be able to give, you know, a small farmer like Nick an answer on his application. That's a lot of bureaucratic infrastructure. That's a lot of people hours. That's a lot of time and jobs that we haven't started filling yet. You know, the portals for public and industry. The Mass Cannabis Control Commission website, I think, is an excellent example. And we're going to need this. You know, we're going to need information for people who are applying, for municipal officials, for the public. So that's going to take a lot of time, and that's going to be something that S54 lets us begin working on. And you know, also a chance to think more about alcohol. I have worked for a nano brewery in Chittenden County. I worked there for about 1.5 years. I would love Vermont's, you know, a lot of cannabis advocates don't like this, comparing cannabis to alcohol, because cannabis is objectively extremely much safer. Alcohol is a carcinogen. Cannabis is non-toxic. But things that we can learn from Vermont's alcohol, you know, regulation paradigm. Is Vermont's brewery industry good because we have the best water, we grow the best hops, we have the smartest brewers, we have the best stainless steel tanks? You know, we're advantaged by policy choices that we've made. In New Jersey, New Hampshire, Mass, they didn't have brew pubs. They didn't have 4th-class licenses. You know, hill farms that exist because this and other, you know, this body and others and industry advocates came together and said, this is an advantage that we can take, that we can have. And so I think eventually we can get to the point of having, you know, a farm stand or a 4th-class license. And I think there are lessons we can learn from the DLC, event permits. I would, as much as I like Sheriff Marcoux, be a lot easier if I could fill out a piece of paper to get it signed by the city official in that municipality, pay a hopefully not crazy fee, and then know that if I've got my security in place, that I can have a 21+ cannabis event, or that my event can have legal cannabis at it. That's something that would generate money, and it's really not reinventing the wheel. Somebody who's filled out a lot of DLC event permits. So, you know, that's another opportunity that we get with the passage of S54, is more people thinking, I think, more entrepreneurially. And then I want to talk about Oregon real quick, and then I'll wrap it up here with some recommendations. Case study. I'm so happy that everybody who's been talking about defeating the illicit market, it will never be completely defeated. Arbitrage will always exist. But I am quoting directly from, this is the Oregon Liquor Cannabis Control Director, Steve Marks. This is in their 2019 report to the legislature. Oregon made an intentional decision to have a low barrier to entry for cultivators. And as Director Marks says, this was an intentional choice. If you want to bring in illicit market, and I think that, you know, Chris Walsh, you know, headed to the same point, and even Nick. You know, if you want to eliminate the illicit market, let them participate. Now, there are many different ways that we could start letting cultivators participate. Medical cultivator licenses, that's something we could have done anytime in the last 4 years. That's something I begged dispensary lobbyists to work with me on last year, you know, and seeing this coming. And it's something that, you know, might be worth pursuing depending on the path of S54, because we know that we're going to need growers, and we know that we want to let small farmers participate. So Oregon's oversupply problem, it's not a problem. Oregon's oversupply problem is evidence of a policy working. It is more in the interest of these growers to take their tracked, tagged product and put it in a warehouse and sit on it for 6 years than it is to sell it out the back door. That's a success in regulation. So we can market, we can say that 6.5 years of supply that they have, that they're sitting on, that's tangible product that's not being diverted to the illicit market. Now, they want it to be more investor friendly. They're playing the long game thing about prohibition, ending federally, and selling that Oregon, butter or whatever vaporizers in New York and New Jersey. And that might happen before they have their own in-state industries, intrastate industries. But again, really important to think about what effect and impact that actually had, because that has been successful. And so, recommendations with S54, revisiting this commission and thinking about structurally what it does, and creating a commission that has the firepower to take on these really big bureaucratic tasks. I imagine somebody showing up for work on day one and having a stack like this of applications to go through. And somebody like me or, lobbyists are going to be calling that person every single day asking when my application is being reviewed. So this is why I don't think temporary licenses are a good idea at all, because I think once we get into the business of actually regulating this, we're going to find that it's much more complicated than we anticipated. And we need, if we're going to have some sort of temporary license, it needs to be conditional on the participation of other actors. We need to have cultivators who are, the dispensaries being vertically integrated. They could do a lot of this, themselves. And we could create, we have 3 entities right now that basically control the entire medical marijuana system in the state. They're allowed to sell to each other, which means they're allowed to price fix, and patients are not allowed to shop between all of them. So it means there's no competition. So, it's not a cartel in action, it's a cartel by definition. So that's the program that we've set with medical, and it's not a paradigm that we should bring over to the adult use. We can leverage the skills and resources that dispensaries have. Again, large-scale cultivation, transportation, some retail, having gone through all of this. But adult use should not be a reason to provide, frankly, corporate welfare to a group of, a small group of people who had the foresight to get involved with this before anybody else. And they will all benefit, they will all participate, and I would like to see them involved as cultivators, as large cultivators, as delivery people, as retailers who are purchasing from other supply. But the philosophical question of, is the purpose of adult use, this S54 bill, is it to protect the financial viability of the medical marijuana dispensaries? I don't think that it is, and I think philosophically that's not a good argument. I'll note that all these other states have not had the choice. This has been referendums, and then they've had to work things out through rulemaking and through a private closed process. No other state has done this the way that Vermont is doing it right now. And the value of this is having input from people directly. And I think that you'll hear a lot of this same feedback in saying that everybody wants this. I don't say everybody wants this, but I think the consensus majority of Vermonters want this. Probably the majority of them just want it as soon as possible, so people like me will shut up about it and we can start getting some money in for this. But there are a lot more people in the silent majority of people who want to participate in this and don't want to see us create an entire industry that is segmented off and create a system where haves and have-nots operate on 2 different sides of the rules. So I think the language that's built in about preferencing dispensaries in the application process makes total sense. I think when it comes to preference in a large cultivator license, preference in a delivery license, preference in a retail license, makes total sense. But the idea of exclusivity, and sort of preferred carpool lanes to get ahead is one that I think is a bad argument. And I think that, there will be a lot of grassroots, factionalization. And so I think we can, with S54, start a process. And, having spoken with dispensary representatives, I do believe there's a sincere interest in everybody collaborating together. But I think something like, a timeline where if dispensaries have first shot at the retail market, more than 50% of their supply comes from licensed small cultivators, right? I mean, that's the kind of logical compromise that everybody's now on the same page. We all need cultivator licenses so that we all can participate. So things like that, I'm happy to talk about all kinds of, inside the and outside the box concepts that we can add here, but I'm happy to take questions about, what we've done with legal events, where sort of this is going, or anything else.
Yes, Jim.
You referred to the health department, maybe not being enthusiastic about wanting to get in the middle of any type of regulatory approach. What is the right home for regulation?
This is not like anything else. It touches a lot of different bodies. I think that there's a body for, a commission that has involvement from, you need the tax department involved, Agency of Agriculture, I think is extremely appropriate. These are the two companies, and then Department of Liquor Control. I mean, again, Cannabis Act, some activists have a problem with this. I don't. I think a 3-tiered system would be much simpler and more logical than the 5-tier one that we're looking at, but I'm not going to fight that battle. So I think that, the chart that Kerry presented with the Agency of Agriculture regulating the plants, and with the Department of Department of Liquor Control, which, includes some public safety. Matt Gagno carries a gun when he comes in and, makes sure that does a sting on me when I'm bartending. Yeah. So I think it's got to be everybody involved. And this is the hard part, is that we need to, at a time when it's politically not popular, build an entirely new bureaucratic infrastructure so that everybody who's testified has a say in the process. There's some sort of political accountability, but then you've got actual workers who are doing the technocratic day-to-day work.
Thank you.
Any other questions, committee? Marcia?
Well, actually, I had an oversight question, which I think got answered.
And I'll just say last thing, questions about efficiency. Burlington Electric, Efficiency Vermont, they are now doing programs, they're offering rebates on grow lights. So this is actually already happening, and I think it's great that in S54 we contemplate giving an advantage to producers who can do it the most sustainably. The only way to do that's outside, or the best way to do that probably is outside, but I am really impressed that our utilities are acting as technocratic. This is a problem that we need to figure out. We're going to have more load on the electric system, so how do we reduce it? If we start thinking about cannabis like that, as a technocratic, bureaucratic, how do we put these pieces together to create these outputs? We can move through it, but I'm not naive. A lot's happened in the past few years, and we're not going to go from heroin to alcohol with this substance in probably one biennium. So, realistic.
Jim?
Is there any difference between the product, not the energy used, but the product, indoor versus outdoors?
Yes, for sure. Although I will say we organized the first Heady Vermont, the first Growers Cup in Vermont this year. And we saw there's a lot of really skilled outdoor cultivators. If you're talking about the percentage of THC you can get if you're making like a butter or an extract or something, we had people doing 20% THC flower strains outdoors, in Irisburg, Vermont. Quality-wise, their indoor will always be much, much better because you can control that environment.
Okay.
But not everybody wants to pay for that. If you're just going to buy a couple pre-rolled joints to smoke at the end of your hike when you're out in Colorado, it's probably a little different. You might have outdoor weed that's inside that pre-roll versus somebody who's a medical patient going to find something that has a really high concentration of THC, or something that has 1-to-1 THC to CBD.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, committee? Thank you for presenting some documents here that have links that we can browse through. I appreciate that.
Yeah, all kinds of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I have some extras for?
Oh yeah.